Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of June of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates and details, so let's start. And of course, the most important piece of news is that the European Union has begun negotiations on the accession of Ukraine and Moldova. The process will be difficult and devoid of shortcuts. Of course, this is a very important piece of news, and I'll remind you that just a few days ago, more precisely yesterday, we were talking about some expectations from the United States of America, and according to information we have, the United States expects that as a result of the NATO summit in July, a positive decision will be made on Ukraine's membership in the European Union. This was stated by the State Department. So everything is done to escalate more and to force the Russians to start acting, let's say, unlogical, without, let's say, with hot brains, without cold mind. But on the other hand, we received very interesting report today from Donald Trump's team, and according to him, Trump offers Ukraine weapons in exchange for negotiations with Russia. Trump advisors presented a plan to push Ukraine towards peace negotiations with Russians. Furthermore, as for this, let's say, plan, there are going to be two proposals: one proposal to Ukraine, another proposal to Russia. If Ukraine, let's say, refused to sit down on the same table with the Russians and to start negotiation process, the United States of America will reduce supply and support of Ukraine till minimal level T0 basically. As for the Russians, Trump has his own plan about Russia. According to him, if Russia doesn't want to sit with Ukrainians on the same table and to start negotiation process, the United States of America will send significant number, basically endless number of weapon and munition to Ukraine. So as I understand, according to information we have, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are willing or are going to accept the plan. So of course we'll see what is going to be next. The NATO summit is going to start very soon, and most likely the next 2 weeks are going to be the most important and the most hot since the beginning of the special military operation. Now let's move to the line of combat contact. We have additional updates. Very interesting information is coming from Kharkiv area. As you can see, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces along the line of combat contact, which indicates that Ukrainians finished the process of the concentration of the forces along the line of combat contact area, and they're just waiting for an order when to start, when to begin the offensive. As for the villages along the line, the Ukrainians tried to made a few attempts to counterattack the Russian positions, but most of them were repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians suffered losses and were forced to fall back. But telling the truth, those weren't like real offensive, those were something like recalls in combat, let's say some attempts to stress the Russians and to make another attempt to find weak point in Russian defense. As for Kharkiv-Liptsy direction, as you can see, almost nothing, just aviation strikes and artillery strikes. The only video we got from the village by the name of Gluboka, the Ukrainians reported that they managed to discover some temporary position of the Russian forces and to attack this territory. Now let's move in Volchansk. As for Volchansk, we got significant number of details and updates, and once again, the most important video is this one. The Russians used another FAB 3000 video, and this probably is the most accurate strike of FAB 3000 since the beginning of when the Russians start using this type of weapon. In this video we can see not a very big building, just 2 floors building, but the Russians, as you can see, were pretty accurate. Of course, we can't tell for sure whether the Russians were attacking this part of the building exactly, but this video shows that the let's say one part of the building was just erased from the history, as there were no building, this part of the building at all. So very powerful weapon. And this video show us and give us the answer to the question how exactly the Russians are planning to use FAB 3000, obviously against the building like this one. You know that currently along the line of combat contact there are a lot of citadels as mushrooms. The Ukrainians have citadel in Volchansk, the Ukrainians have citadel in Chasiv Yar. There are maybe from 5 till 10 citadels inside of Toretsk agglomeration. Ugledar is a separate let's say, citadel itself. We have citadel in Krasnohorivka. We have endless of citadels. And for example, if talking as considering Kharkiv itself, the town Kharkiv, or Zaporozhye or Kiev, it's one biggest citadel ever. So that's why the Russians probably found a solution how to crack these nets very fast. And as for the northern part of Volchansk, we start receiving very interesting videos from both sides, either from the Russian and from the Ukrainian side. For example, the group of forces north stop talking and stop providing us any details and any updates about the current situation of Volchansk aggregate plant, as if the Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory. But the Russians, on the other hand, published today the video of how they were hunting and attacking the Ukrainian soldiers exactly in this building. Currently, we can't tell for sure whether the video is fresh and was made, let's say, today or yesterday. But anyway, if this video was made, let's say, yesterday or today, this indicates that Ukrainians managed to counterattack the Russian forces and once again to cut the Russian forces inside of the aggregate plant from the mainland. We are not going to change the map for now. Maybe we will color this territory as a gray zone because we need additional details and more information. But this video once again indicates that the Ukrainians managed to encircle the Russians once again. So we'll see what is going to be next. On the other hand, we received for the first time since the beginning of the battle for Volchansk videos confirming the Russian presence inside of the citadel. At least they were just a video of Russian losses, but the video was published by the Ukrainian side, so it's the only thing that we can see from the Ukrainian videos. So the Russian infantry were discovered and spotted along this building and along this building, along the Korolenko Street, between the buildings number 54 and 56. For now, we are not going to adjust the map as well, because on these videos we can see just the casualties among the Russians. So that's why we'll keep as this, and we're gonna need additional, let's say, information to change corrections. According to neutral mappers, the Ukrainians continue improving their positions between eastern Volchansk and the village of Tikha, and according to neutral mappers, the Ukrainians captured completely the strait by the name of Mikhaila Kotsubovskого. So very important progress. As we can see, the Ukrainians continue their counterattacks and counteroffensive operations. There are very heavy clashes. Of course, the situation currently let's say, develops not in Ukrainian favor, because the Russians control the main supply roads, the main strategical, let's say, hills. But who knows? Maybe it's just a matter of time, but not the matter whether the Ukrainians are able to regain and restore control over these territories. Now let's move further in the northern Kupyansk direction. As you can see, during the previous night, we have significant number of geolocations. The most important geolocations are coming, as usually, from Oskol River. The Ukrainians continue building and repairing the bridges along the river, and the Russians, as soon as they see another repaired bridge, try to destroy the bridge as soon as possible. In this video, we can see another missile or artillery strike and the consequences of these strikes. As for the area between Volchansk, Pershatravny, and Petropavlovka, during the previous days, we got a lot of updates of how the Russians were improving their positions using the broad front line attack. The Russians were moving through the fields, trying to get as close as possible to Petropavlovka, and the Russians managed to capture additional positions, additional strongholds and the shelters of armed forces of Ukraine. And the Russians published the video of how the Ukrainians were trying to conduct a counteroffensive with the purpose to restore lost positions, to regain lost positions. In this video, we can see a small convoy with one Ukrainian tank T-64 and one personnel carrier. We will not watch the video till the end, because as a result of Russian counter-artillery strikes and FPV drone strikes, both machines were destroyed. The Ukrainians suffered significant losses, and those who managed to survive were forced to fall back. As for Peshchana Stelmakhovka, for now we haven't received anything, but according right before we start making the video, we got report that the Russians entered Stelmakhovka, and maybe we are going to start receiving geolocations from inside of the village very soon. For now, let's wait a bit, then we will do some changes and corrections. Now let's move to Siversk direction. We have a lot of very interesting updates, and probably the most important update is coming from the village of Sporne. I'll just remind you that since the beginning of May, this small village that was already, turned into dust, was, most focused area from our Russian FPV drone forces and artillery and aviation. Just take a look at number of icons and geolocations that we can find in this village since the beginning of May, and probably this is the most focused area of Russian artillery, FPV droners, and so on. And after 2 months of basically reducing this territory to ruins, the Russians began their offensive operation. For these purposes, the Russians were using a convoy with significant number of armored vehicles. This video was published by the Ukrainians, so before we finish with the video, I would like to tell you that we will not see in this video, significant progress of the Russian armed forces, because once again the video was published by the Ukrainians. But this video gave us a lot of very interesting information. First of all, geolocations, where exactly and which area the Russians managed to reach. And summarizing everything that we can see in the video, the Russians were attacking using this road, and according to information, according to this video, the Russians managed to reach this line. We don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to answer the farms or the ruins that led from the farms, but anyway, this is very important attempt to attack, and most likely the Russians are not going to stop. The Russians will increase the pressure, and during the next few days or the next hours, the Russians will make more attempts, and they will try to repeat their offensives. So if everything goes like this, obviously within the next few days the Russians will capture this territory completely. Now let's move in direction of Rozdolivka. We have very important update from this territory. According to some Russian sources, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this small village. We have the video of how the Russian FPV drone, or just Russian drone, was trying to raise Russian flag in the central and the north western part of the village, and of course the Russians managed to do this. This is something like a game between Russian and FPV operators and Ukrainians. If you remember, the Ukrainians made lots of attempts like this along Dnipro River. Mainly the Ukrainians were trying to raise their flags in the village of Krynki and in the village of Kazachie Lahiri, and there were lots of successful attempts, and now the Russians are doing the same. The most important is that this video doesn't indicate that the Russians managed to capture. This is just interesting episode of the battle for Rozdolivka, but once again, according to information we have, for now without any geolocations, the Russians captured this territory completely. During the previous day, we got a lot of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainians, but once again, without any changes on the ground as for geolocations. Now we are moving further in direction of Chasiv Yar. There are still very heavy clashes. The Russians continue hunting and attacking the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians try to counterattack the Russians from their side. So there are very heavy clashes, but we see that the days are numbered. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but in 2-3 weeks, Chasiv Yar will be captured completely. In this video, we can see abandoned Ukrainian tank that was destroyed by the Russian FPV drone. So just a small episode of battle from this area. Now we are moving in Toretsk direction. We have lots of very important things from this territory, and first of all we got geolocations that confirms the Russian control over the pump station. The video was published by the Ukrainian sources, more precisely by the 28th Mechanized Brigade. This brigade is also responsible for this territory. This is the Brigade 28. This is its area of responsibility, everything that located in the northern part of the village by the name of Druzhba. And furthermore, we got unconfirmed report that the Russians managed to capture this territory between Siversk Donetsk-Donbass Canal and the railway. So 2 strongholds and the 3 lines were captured. This report we got almost this morning, so lots of hours ago. So most likely during the previous day, the Russians managed to improve their position even further in the northern part, and tomorrow we're going to adjust the map once again, at least by adding a contested area. As for Druzhba itself, according to, once again, unconfirmed report, but from very reliable sources like neutral mappers and very reliable pro-Russian mappers, the Russians managed to enter Druzhba itself, Pivnichna itself, the village, the town of Pivnichna, and currently there are very heavy clashes along Miru Strait. As for Ukrainians, we have also very important update. The thing is that the Russians are moving. We see that the Russians are forced to stretch forces, that the Russians, at least the first wave of Russian attack, is more or less exhausted. So that's why the Ukrainians, and of course, since the beginning of this operation, is already 4 or 5 days left after past since the beginning of this Toretsk offensive operation, and these days were enough for the Ukrainians to regroup and to bring additional reinforcement. So during the previous 24 hours, for the first time since the battle for Toretsk, the Ukrainians tried to counterattack the Russians, and they were attacking using this road. So from the coal mine by the name of South in the vicinity of this landfill, the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians using just light infantry without use of any armored vehicles or personnel carriers. The thing is that this territory is completely filled and covered with mines, so it's because this is defense belt of that been built by the Ukrainians and the Russians since 2014. So there are lots of minefields, and to attack through these fields is a suicide operation. So the only forces that can bypass these territories, infantry groups, and the Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russians right in the base, in the core of this operation, but the Russians managed to discover the movements of Ukrainian forces, and they bombed them and attacked them with soft tower systems. Currently, we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to repel that attack, whether the Ukrainians suffered significant losses, but the only thing we know for sure that after that attack or during this attack, we haven't received any updates about possible or any Ukrainian, let's say, advance or progress in this area. There was an attempt, but most likely that attempt was repelled by the Russians. Also, we have reports about significant number of forces of 24th Brigade who surrendered in this area. Probably after this collapse in Toretsk, the Ukrainians decided to return back some forces from Chasiv Yar back just to stabilize the situation and just to make new forces in this area to get used to the situation, to the configuration of the front line, and lots of soldiers were captured. According to information we have, after a few days of failed attempts from the Ukrainian side to stabilize the situation, they decided to announce official and forced evacuation. And according to the data the Ukrainian authorities provided, at the beginning of this Toretsk battle, there were around, the population of this area was around 6,000 people, and according to information we have right now, by the morning of 25th of June, the population was reduced till 5.5 thousand. So 500 people left this territory as soon as the clashes began. Now let's move to the western Avdiivka area. As for Novoalexandrovka, we haven't received any information. Probably after the Russians captured the territory, they tried to dig in deeper and try to prepare the foothold and the roads for further offensive, real offensive in direction of Vozdvizhenka. Yet we haven't received any updates about Russian control over these, let's say, farms. As for Alexandrovka, Alexandropol, the area, the roads that goes, let's say, in direction of Toretsk, we have a few fresh FPV drone strikes in this area. The Russians used to publish in this area just FAB strikes and artillery strikes, and now we can see that the Russians start clearing this territory with drones, which confirms and indicates that there are very heavy clashes, and the Russians are trying to reduce and to destroy the first, let's say, defense belt, and after that to enter this stronghold itself. We are moving further in direction of Sokol. According to information we have, according to geolocations, the Russians improved their positions in the northern part. But as for Sokol itself, the Ukrainians are fighting till the last Ukrainian. For example, in this video we can see the work of Bradley 47th Mechanized Brigade that was sent in this area to counterattack the Russian forces. The video was geolocated almost in the most eastern part of the village. For example, this is Bradley who was attacking the Russian positions there. This video first of all indicates that the Ukrainians are still in Sokol and that the village either in the gray zone or maybe let's say a very big part of the village is still under Ukrainian control. As for Novoselivka Persha, we continue receiving significant number of updates of how the Russians continue its hunting, let's say, after for Ukrainian Bradley's Western weapon. The Ukrainians continue suffering losses, and they're not between among the personnel. We are not receiving the videos of this type, but obviously the losses are very huge. But we continue receiving lots of updates of how the Russians destroying Bradley. For example, about the losses. Today, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation provided us additional information about the losses of the armed forces of Ukraine, and today we got another anti-record. According to the Ministry of Defense, the Russians managed to develop significant results all over the line of combat contact, and the Ukrainians lost more than around 2,345 soldiers. So it's the biggest number since the beginning of the special military operation. And now we are moving further. In Krasnohorivka direction, we have additional updates. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive, managed to establish control over the first buildings in Krasnohorivka citadel. This information was published by pro-Ukrainian Deep State. Currently, we can't tell for sure what exactly is happening here, because it was too fast. It was too unexpected, because as for citadels, we know that experience tell us that it's unlikely the Russians are able to, anybody unlikely is able to capture the citadel in this war. But as I understand, due to significant progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation in the western and the northwestern part of Krasnohorivka, so according to progress of the Russians in this area, the Ukrainians decided to begin the let's say fallback process. The Ukrainians probably abandoned their positions inside of the citadel in direction of the central and the northern part of Krasnohorivka, and this is the reason why the Russians managed to enter this territory without any resistance from the Ukrainian side. Once again, during the previous 3 days, we got significant number of updates from this territory, and as we discussed, as we noted, most likely this configuration of the map doesn't correspond to the reality. Most likely the Russians have much better positions, and this development, this progress of the Russian forces forced the Ukrainians to begin the process of abandoning their positions in the eastern part of Krasnohorivka. So I see the situation as is, as I just described to you. As for South Donetsk direction, we continue received lots of very interesting updates from the 79th Air Mobile Brigade. Today they reported that as a result of clashes, currently it is there are lots of soldiers everywhere along the entire line of combat contact who refuse to follow orders. And of course, currently we have just one order from the Ukrainian side to counterattack the Russians, and obviously everybody understands that this is something like a suicide operations. Now let's move to Rozhaina. We have significant number of geolocations, and most of them, as you can see, are located on the main supply road that goes from Velika Novoselivka in the southern direction towards Rozhaina. The Russians published additional batch of videos of how they were hunting and destroying the Ukrainian FPV drones, the Ukrainian machines, cars, vehicles, light vehicles in this area. Probably the Ukrainians were trying to evacuate some tanks, to evacuate some vehicles, but everything was spotted and everything was destroyed. So the Ukrainians suffered significant losses, and the most important, that the only supply road that Ukrainians have in this area was completely cut by the Russians. As for Blagodatne, we start receiving lots of videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory with FABs, which also indicates that the focus is moving further and further in the northern direction, and that the Russians are about the beginning of the battle, the final battle for Rozhaina, and the beginning for battle of Makarovka, Starozhovo, and other towns along Mokry Yalo River. As for Robotina, we haven't received anything. As for Kherson direction, just regular activity, regular strikes. The Russians are bombing the Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainians are bombing the Russian forces with FPV drones. This is the same video that we used to saw yesterday, before yesterday, but with another angle. The Russians reported that as a result of this strike, first they managed to discover the command center armed forces of Ukraine, and then to destroy it as a result of FAB strike. As you can see, the situation is very difficult in this area. area. Today, the Russian sources also published the moment when the Attackams missile was destroyed in the sky above the shore of Crimea. And then this video, I believe you've seen this video, we can see the consequences and the casualties as a result of the secondary detonation. So very interesting days, very important things are ahead of us. So let's see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.